Life is just full of unexpected moments. A stray ball flies over a fence, someone slips on a wet floor, just freak accidents. But when something does go wrong and someone gets hurt, how do we decide who's to blame? Well, the legal system has a really specific and pretty fascinating way of figuring that out, and that's what we're going to dive into. So, picture this. You're in a park, you hit a ball, and somehow, against all odds, it sails over a massive fence and hits someone walking down the street. It's a total 1 in a million shot. Are you legally responsible? Well, the answer isn't as simple as just yes or no. To get to the bottom of it, we need to meet a very special and very imaginary person.
And here they are, the reasonable person. Now, this isn't a real person, obviously. It's a hypothetical standard that's at the absolute center of how courts decide cases about negligence. The question the law always asks is this: what would a sensible, ordinary, prudent person have done in that exact same situation? And here's the thing that's so important to get. The law doesn't expect you to be perfect. It doesn't expect you to be a superhero who can predict every possible crazy outcome. It just expects a level of good old-fashioned common sense. It's not a standard of perfection. It's a standard of, just being reasonable. So how does this actually play out in a real courtroom?
Let's take a look at a classic case from way back in 1951, Bolton v. Stone. This one really brings the whole reasonable person idea to life. It's got a cricket ground, a public road, and one extremely unlucky shot. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want you to remember this number: 6. 6 times in 30 years. That's it. That's how many times a cricket ball had ever managed to fly completely out of this specific cricket ground. And this one little fact, it turned out to be everything. Okay, so here's what went down. A player hits an incredible shot. The ball clears the fence and hits a woman, Miss Stone, who was just standing outside her house. So she sues the cricket club. She argues, hey, you guys were negligent. You should have had a higher fence or done something to stop this from happening. And on the face of it, you kind of think, yeah, she's got a point, right? But the court, they actually disagreed. And this quote gets right to the heart of why. Remember that number? 6 times in 30 years? The court basically said the chance of this happening was so incredibly small, so remote, that a reasonable person wouldn't have gone to the massive expense and trouble to prevent it. So the club wasn't negligent. So this case seems to give us a pretty simple rule, right? If a risk is tiny enough, you might be in the clear. But is that really the whole story? What if the potential harm is catastrophic, even if the chance of it happening is super, super small? Well, that exact question showed that the law needed a better, more complete test. And for that, we have to jump forward to a huge Australian case from 1980, Wyong Shear Council v. Shirt. This whole thing started because a water skier got seriously hurt after he misunderstood a deep water sign in a lake. This case forced the court to come up with a much clearer, much more useful formula for how we should weigh risk. You can really see the legal thinking evolving here. That first case, Bolton v. Stone, was almost entirely focused on just the low probability. But this new case, the Shirt case, it brought other crucial factors into the spotlight. The court realized it had to think about not just how likely an accident was, but also how bad the injuries could be, and how easy it would have been to stop it. And that's exactly what they did. This case ended up creating what's now seen as the definitive, modern test for negligence in many places. It gives us a practical formula that anyone, from a city council to someone planning a party, can use to think about their responsibilities. This amazing little formula is often called the risk calculus, or more specifically, the Shirt calculus. And once you get how it works, you'll see exactly how courts manage to balance all these different factors to decide what's reasonable and what's not. Okay, so the very first step is super simple. Is the risk foreseeable? And the court set the bar for this really, really low. A risk is foreseeable as long as it's not completely far-fetched or fanciful. So that stray cricket ball? Yep, foreseeable. The water skier misreading a sign? Also foreseeable. It just has to be a real possibility, even if it's a remote one. So once a risk passes that first little test, the court moves on to this 3-part balancing act. First, you look at the probability, just like in the cricket case. How likely is this to happen? Second, you have to consider the seriousness of the harm. I mean, a scraped knee is one thing, but a catastrophic injury is another. And third, you weigh the burden of taking precautions. How hard or how expensive would it be to fix the problem? And this is what makes the whole thing so smart. It's not just about one thing. A risk might have a really low probability, sure, but if the potential harm is absolutely devastating and the cost of preventing it is tiny, like putting up a better sign, then a reasonable person is expected to take that precaution. It's all about that balance.
So, at the end of the day, this simple calculus is the modern playbook for figuring out who's responsible. It's the logical tool that courts use to measure what someone did or didn't do against the standard of that reasonable person we talked about.
Which, of course, brings it all back to us. Now that you know the test, how the law weighs probability, seriousness, and the cost of prevention, think about the world around you. What precautions in your own life aren't just possible, but are actually reasonable? It's a pretty interesting question to ask yourself.